The room was silent, except for the soft crackle of a dying candle. The mirror in front of me was blank. No reflection, no trace of the person staring into it. My breath caught in my throat as I reached out, my hand trembling. The glass was cold, solid, real. But where was I? Think you know how this story ends? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. It's just the lighting, I muttered, my voice barely audible. I stepped back, rubbing my eyes, hoping the outline of my face would reappear. Didn't. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, growing longer and darker, though the candle remained steady. The clock on the wall chimed softly, 3 slow, deliberate strikes. 3 in the morning. I turned sharply, half expecting someone to be there. Empty. Just the familiar hum of the refrigerator in the other room and the faint, distant pop of leftover fireworks from the New Year's celebrations. I didn't want to look back at the mirror, but something pulled me toward it, like a thread tugging at my chest. My fingers brushed the candle's base, and I froze. A faint smudge had appeared in the glass, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't where my face should have been. It was higher, just over my shoulder. My breath came out in a shallow gasp as I leaned closer. It wasn't a smudge. It was the outline of a face. I whipped around, but there was no one there. The room was exactly as it should have been, messy, familiar, and unnervingly quiet. When I looked back at the mirror, the face was gone. I backed away, my legs shaking, and nearly stumbled over the chair I'd pushed against the door earlier. I hadn't locked it. I should have locked it. The ritual was supposed to be harmless. A stupid game we'd played at the party. Light a candle, stare into the mirror, and make a wish for the new year. No one had taken it seriously. You'll see your future self, someone had joked, passing around the battered notebook with the instructions. I'd laughed too. But now, standing alone in the pale glow of the candle, my reflection gone, that laughter felt like a distant memory. The air shifted. I felt it. Not a breeze, but a presence, thick and heavy, like someone breathing just inches from my face. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, but the shadows offered no answers. Then the candle flickered. Once, twice. It went out. I stumbled toward the light switch, slamming my hand against the wall, but the bulb didn't respond. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, low and sharp, slicing through the silence. You shouldn't have done it. The voice sliced through the darkness like a blade. I froze, gripping the edge of the counter. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breath, but each gasp felt louder than the silence around me. The voice wasn't coming from inside the room. It wasn't behind me. It was everywhere. The candle reignited suddenly, its flame steady and unnaturally bright. The light spread across the room, illuminating everything. Everything except the mirror. The glass was black now, a dark void that seemed to stretch endlessly. I reached for my phone, the only thing I could think of that might tether me to reality. But when I lifted the screen, the reflection wasn't mine. A face stared back, familiar and wrong. The eyes were hollow, the lips slightly curled, as if it knew something I didn't. Then it mouthed something slow and deliberate. I couldn't hear the words, but I understood them all the same. Read the rules. My hands trembled as I turned toward the notebook sitting on the counter. The old, tattered cover looked ordinary enough, but now it seemed heavier, darker, as if the weight of its pages had tripled. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't ignore it. I opened the notebook to the first page. My heart sank as I read the hastily scrawled text. Rules for the reflection ritual. 1. Never blow out the candle yourself. Wait for the flame to extinguish on its own. 2. If your reflection lingers after you move, do not turn your back on it. 3. If your reflection disappears entirely, you must leave the room immediately. Do not return until dawn. 4. Never, under any circumstances, speak to your reflection. The last rule was scratched out, but I could still make it out beneath the messy lines. 5. If you break any of these rules, your reflection will no longer belong to you. The words blurred as my vision swam, my pulse pounding in my ears. Couldn't breathe. My reflection wasn't in the mirror anymore. I had already broken Rule 3. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. The mirror buzzed faintly, and the surface rippled like water. My stomach twisted as I realized something was pressing against it. From the other side, I slammed the notebook shut and staggered backward, my knees weak. My reflection didn't belong to me anymore. What did that even mean? My thoughts spiraled, clashing between disbelief and sheer panic. The notebook fell open again, as if pulled by an unseen force, and the pages flipped to a section that hadn't been there before. To those who break the rules. 1. Do not turn off the lights. Shadows thrive in the dark. 2. Keep the candle burning at all costs. If it goes out again, you will lose more than just your reflection. 3. Avoid mirrors for the next 3 days. Reflections will not be friendly. I stumbled to the light switch and flipped it on. The bulb flickered once before flooding the room with harsh white light. I didn't trust it. I grabbed the candle and relit it, my shaking hands barely managing to steady the match. As I looked around, I noticed the corners of the room seemed darker than they should have been. The shadows pooled unnaturally, stretching toward me, but never crossing into the candlelight. Then the buzzing started again. Low at first, like a faint hum, but it grew louder with every passing second. It wasn't coming from the mirror anymore. It was coming from the hallway. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't stay in the room. The notebook had said to leave until dawn, but dawn was hours away. My stomach knotted as I glanced at the clock. 3:07 a.m. I crept toward the door, candle in hand, and peeked into the hallway. It stretched endlessly, far longer than it should have. The walls seemed to twist and bow, warping in the dim light. Footsteps echoed softly, distant but growing closer. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer, just the rhythmic sound of someone walking, slow and deliberate. I stepped back into the room and closed the door. My back pressed against the wood as I tried to think, to make sense of what was happening. The rules, the footsteps, the shadows, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. A single knock on the door jolted me upright. It wasn't loud, but it was firm. Another knock followed, then another, each one spaced perfectly apart. I glanced at the notebook, hoping for answers, but the pages had gone blank. The knock stopped, replaced by a faint scratching sound. My hand gripped the doorknob, though I wasn't sure why. The candlelight flickered as the scratching grew louder. And then, a voice. "Let me in." The scratching at the door stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I held my breath, waiting for whatever was on the other side to move, to speak, to do anything. The silence dragged on, every second louder than the last. The candle in my hand flickered again, threatening to go out. I tightened my grip, willing the flame to stay alive. The rules were clear, no light meant danger. Then, the voice returned. "You can't hide forever." It wasn't coming from the hallway this time. It was closer, too close. I whipped my head around, scanning the room, but everything was still. My pulse thundered in my ears as the voice spoke again, low and mocking. "You broke the rules. Now it's my turn." I staggered back, nearly dropping the candle, as a shadow shifted in the corner of the room. It didn't belong to anything, not furniture, not me. It moved on its own, stretching unnaturally, its edges sharp and jagged. I stumbled toward the door, yanking it open and spilling into the hallway. The air outside was colder, heavier. My footsteps echoed as I moved quickly, trying to put as much distance as I could between myself and that room. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, a distorted maze that shouldn't have been possible. I turned left, clutching the candle, and walked quickly. But as I moved, the walls around me began to change. The faded wallpaper peeled back, revealing mirrors, dozens of them, lining both sides of the corridor. Each one reflected the dim light of the candle, but not me. Instead, I saw it again. The face, my face, twisted, hollow, and grinning from every angle. "You'll never make it out," it whispered, the voice overlapping itself, each mirror echoing the same taunt. My chest tightened as I pressed forward, avoiding the glass, refusing to meet its gaze. The corridor seemed to stretch forever, the mirrors endless. But then I saw it, a door at the end of the hallway. A flicker of hope pushed me forward, but as I reached for the handle, the candle flickered violently, and then the flame went out. The darkness was immediate, swallowing everything. The mirrors disappeared, replaced by blackness so thick I couldn't see my own hands. I stumbled, reaching blindly for the door, but the handle was gone. And then the footsteps began. Soft at first, like someone walking barefoot on a carpet, then louder, heavier, until they were all I could hear. They weren't mine. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a sharp, jagged laugh. It came from everywhere at once, filling the darkness with its weight. "You thought the rules would protect you? They were never meant for that." Something cold brushed against my arm, and I jerked away, falling against the wall. My hands scraped against the rough surface as I fumbled to relight the candle, my fingers shaking too much to hold the match steady. The laugh faded, replaced by a whisper, soft and sinister. "Run." The match flared to life, and the candle ignited just as the air behind me shifted. A shadow lunged forward, slamming into the wall where I'd been seconds before. Its form was wrong, jagged and incomplete, like a patchwork of nightmares stitched together. I bolted, the candlelight barely keeping up as I ran. The hallway twisted and turned, the mirrors reappearing, each one reflecting that same twisted version of my face. But now it wasn't just grinning, it was moving. The reflections were pounding on the glass, their fists slamming against the mirrors, cracks spreading across the surface. The sound was deafening, like the world was shattering around me. I rounded a corner and found another door, this one slightly ajar. Without thinking, I threw myself inside and slammed it shut. The room was silent, the only sound my ragged breathing. I leaned against the door, clutching the candle like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The walls here weren't lined with mirrors. Instead, they were covered in strange symbols scratched into the plaster. The shapes were jagged, chaotic, but somehow they felt familiar, as if I'd seen them before. On the far side of the room was a table, and on it another notebook. I didn't want to approach it, but something compelled me forward. The candlelight revealed more writing, this time in a shaky, uneven hand. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. The rules were never for your safety, they were to keep it contained. You let it out. Now it's your problem." The air in the room shifted again, growing heavier. I turned slowly, my heart sinking as I saw the shadows in the corners deepen. They weren't empty anymore. Eyes glinted from the darkness, cold and unblinking. And then, one by one, figures began to step forward, their movements jerky and unnatural. Each one was familiar, Each one was me. Dozens of versions of myself, each more distorted than the last, filled the room. Their hollow eyes locked onto mine, their mouths curling into cruel smiles. "You can't run from yourself," one of them hissed, its voice a perfect replica of mine, twisted with malice. I backed away, clutching the candle, but the flames sputtered as they drew closer. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat, but I didn't know what they meant or how to use them. The first figure lunged, its face inches from mine, its hands reaching out. I swung the candle instinctively, the flame flaring brightly as it connected. The figure recoiled, its scream echoing as it dissolved into smoke. But the others didn't stop. The figures were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their faces twisting into grotesque versions of my own. I swung the candle again, the flame flaring brightly, but it was weaker this time. The shadows seemed to absorb the light, their forms growing darker, denser. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking, but they didn't listen. One of them lunged, its movements unnaturally fast, and I barely had time to step aside. Its hand grazed my arm, and an icy pain shot through me, sharp and numbing. I stumbled back, crashing into the table. The notebook slid to the floor, its pages flipping wildly as if caught in a wind that wasn't there. The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, casting a faint glow that seemed to hold the shadows at bay. I didn't know what they meant, but they were the only thing keeping me alive. I dropped to my knees, grabbing the notebook, my hands trembling as I searched for something, anything, that could help. My eyes landed on a passage near the back, scrawled in the same shaky handwriting as before. "To banish what you've unleashed, you must face it. But be warned. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Face it." I didn't even know what it was. The room trembled, the air growing colder with every passing second. The shadows loomed closer, circling me like predators closing in on their prey. I forced myself to stand, clutching the notebook in one hand and the candle in the other. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the rules, the symbols, the cryptic warnings. Nothing made sense, but I didn't have a choice. The first figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Its face was a perfect replica of mine, but its eyes were empty, soulless. It reached out, its voice a chilling echo of my own. "Give up. You can't win." My back hit the wall, and I realized too late that I'd cornered myself. The figures closed in, their twisted faces filling my vision. The candle sputtered again, the flame barely holding on. In desperation, I held the candle high and shouted, "Come on. Then, if you want me, take me." The flame erupted, brighter than before, blindingly bright. The figures screamed, their forms dissolving into smoke as the light consumed them. The room shook violently, and the symbols on the walls burned brighter, their glow searing into my vision. When the light faded, I was alone. The room was silent, the air heavy with the scent of burning wax. I staggered forward, my legs weak, and looked around. The walls were bare, the symbols gone. The shadows had retreated, leaving only the faint flicker of the candlelight. But then I heard it, a faint whisper, soft and mocking, coming from the door behind me. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw the door begin to open. A hand, pale and thin, gripped the edge of the doorframe. My breath caught as the figure stepped through, its face hidden in shadow. It wasn't one of the twisted reflections. It was me, the real me, or at least that's what it looked like. But its movements were wrong, too smooth, too controlled. Its eyes glinted with something dark, something inhuman. "You let me out," it said, its voice calm, almost amused. "Now you'll have to take my place." I stumbled back, my mind racing. Take its place? What did that mean? "You broke the rules," it continued, stepping closer. "You lost your reflection. And now someone has to stay here." The shadows began to creep back into the room, swirling around its feet like smoke. I backed away, clutching the candle, but the flame was dim now, barely a spark. "This isn't real," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "This can't be real." The figure tilted its head, its grin widening. "Real enough," it said. "But don't worry, it'll only hurt for a moment." The shadows surged forward, and I felt the cold grip of something wrapping around my legs, pulling me down. I screamed, thrashing against the darkness, but it was too strong. The candle fell from my hand, rolling across the floor as the flame went out. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no air. Just emptiness. Then, a spark. The candle reignited, its flame steady and bright. The shadows were gone, the room empty. I lay on the floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling. I sat up slowly, my eyes scanning the room. It was quiet now, too quiet. The notebook was gone, the symbols erased. It was as if none of it had ever happened. But when I looked into the mirror, I knew the truth. My reflection was back, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. But it wasn't me. Not anymore. It smiled, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "You'll get used to it," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. Eventually, the silence was deafening. The room felt cold, lifeless, as if the air itself had been drained of energy. I sat on the floor, staring at the flickering candle that had somehow reignited itself. The mirror stood in front of me, reflecting everything as it should. Everything except the person I used to know. My reflection smiled back, its expression calm and knowing. It tilted its head, mimicking my movements, but the familiarity wasn't comforting. It was hollow, empty, like looking at a stranger wearing my face. "You made it out," it said, its voice eerily identical to mine. "But you won't forget me. You never will." I didn't respond. What was the point? It already knew the truth. The notebook was gone. The symbols on the walls had faded. The shadows had retreated. The rules, the warnings, the games. It all felt like a distant nightmare, but the chill in my bones reminded me it was real. I stood slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. The mirror's surface rippled, distorting my reflection for a brief moment before settling again. My reflection didn't move this time. It simply watched. "This isn't over," it whispered. I turned away, unable to look at it any longer, and stepped out into the hallway. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of burnt wax and something faintly metallic. The front door was open, the night sky visible beyond it. I hesitated. The world outside felt different now, darker somehow, even though the stars still shimmered above. As I stepped through the doorway, a strange weight lifted from my chest, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like something had been taken from me, something I couldn't name. Days passed. I avoided mirrors, covering them with sheets or turning them to face the wall. But it didn't help. I still felt it watching me. In the silence of the night, I could hear faint whispers, too quiet to make out but loud enough to remind me it was there. People started noticing. "You look different," they'd say. "Are you feeling okay?" I'd smile and nod, brushing off their questions. What else could I do? How could I explain what had happened? Each night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in. And every night, I'd feel it, the weight of its gaze, my reflection, waiting for me to look, to slip up, to give it another chance. The notebook, the ritual, the rules, they haunted me. Who wrote them? How many others had played this game? Were they still out there, living their lives with someone else wearing their face? I thought about going back to the house, searching for answers. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't help. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I uncovered the bathroom mirror, forcing myself to look. My reflection stared back, perfectly still, perfectly me. I leaned closer, searching for something, anything that would confirm my fears. And for a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. But then it blinked. I hadn't. Ready for more chills and mysteries? Subscribe and turn on the bell. You never know what story is coming next.